The first time Busy saw blood on her heel, she didn't scream. She didn't even pause. She just bent slightly, wiped it off with the corner of a crumpled tissue from her handbag, tossed it into the gutter, and lit another cigarette. It was a Sunday morning, just before the church bells rang, and the streets of her township were still littered with last night's noise. Bottles clinking underfoot, the slow drag of plastic bags in the wind, and the ghost of cheap perfume, clinging to every corner like a memory no one had asked for. Busi stood outside the usual shebeen, her back leaning against its stained yellow wall, one leg crossed over the other. She was already dressed for the night, though the sun was still climbing. Her dress was tight, red, and unforgiving. It shimmered slightly when she moved, like firelight caught on skin. Her hair was high, her lashes thick, and her heels tall enough to make most men forget to blink. But her eyes told a different story. They were tired, not from lack of sleep, but from too many broken promises wearing different shoes. In this corner of Cape Town's edge, everyone knew Busi. You didn't have to know her name. Her walk, her presence, the way her mouth twisted into a half smile like she knew something you didn't. That was enough. Kids whispered her name with giggles behind their hands. Men glanced too long, and women pulled their partners away. To some, she was a scandal. To others, a survivor. But Busi didn't care. She never had. She'd stopped caring when she was 17, standing barefoot in a kitchen where the smell of boiled maize couldn't hide the stench of her stepfather's breath. She had 3 rules. Rules she repeated to herself like prayers. Rule 1, no love. Rule 2, no regulars. Rule 3, no dreams. Love, she believed, was a knife dressed like a kiss. It came smiling, but always left you bleeding. She had seen what love did to women in her street, watched them carry babies for men who vanished with the rent. She had seen women wait by the phone until their bones ached, only to hear nothing but silence. No regulars. That was easy. Regulars became familiar. Familiar became risky. Risky became pain. A different man every time. No names, no stories, just transactions. She was not their therapist. She was not their hope. And if they tried to be soft with her, she knew how to harden her voice like a slap. And the last rule, no dreams. Dreams, she believed, were for girls who had someone waiting for them. For people with houses that locked from the inside. For women who could walk past mirrors without avoiding their eyes. Dreams made you weak. Dreams whispered things you could never afford to chase. So Busi moved like someone who had already buried every soft part of herself. She counted her money by torchlight, avoided eye contact with the girls who were starting younger every year, and ignored the tiny ache that sometimes settled in her chest when a gospel song drifted from a passing car. That morning, after wiping the blood from her foot, Busi walked the long way home. She didn't want to talk to the other women. They always asked the same questions. How much did you make? Did he tip? Was he gentle? Gentleness was a word Busi hated. It never lasted. She passed a fruit seller setting up crates, a boy hosing down the pavement, and 2 old men arguing over a football match from 3 days ago. Life in the township didn't stop. It just repeated itself, like a scratched cassette. The same stories, the same music, the same regrets. When she finally reached her shack, a single room made from patched metal sheets and leftover dreams, she bolted the door behind her and collapsed onto the bed. Her mattress was thin, her fan broken, and her ceiling dripped when it rained. But it was hers. No one yelled in this room. No one touched her unless she allowed it. Here she didn't have to smile. She lit another cigarette, watching the smoke curl toward the ceiling like it was trying to escape. She exhaled slowly, counting backward from 10, a ritual she learned in a rehab center she never finished. She wasn't addicted. At least not in the way they thought. She was addicted to forgetting. And some nights, That was the only thing that kept her breathing. She thought about her mother, briefly. A woman with silent hands and a cracked rosary. A woman who had once tried to leave, then gave up. Busi had promised herself she would never be that. She would never stay somewhere love didn't live. But now, she wasn't sure love lived anywhere. Near her at all. She didn't notice the man until the third visit. At first, he looked like the others, nervous, hungry, trying not to stare too long. But he was different. He asked to sit, just sit, and talk. Busi laughed in his face. "You paying to talk?" she asked. He nodded. She shrugged. "Your money, your madness." He returned again the next week, then again. He never touched her, never asked. He brought stories instead, silly ones. About how he once tried to raise chickens and they all flew away. About how he hated mayonnaise but loved bread. About how he played the trumpet as a boy, even though his mother said it gave her headaches. Busi listened without meaning to. She found herself waiting for the days he came. She didn't even know his name. And he didn't ask for hers. That was the safest part. But safety, she knew, was the first part of the trap. The fourth time he came, he brought a sandwich wrapped in brown paper. Busi didn't ask for it. She didn't even look at it. But she placed it on the side table instead of the trash. That was the first small crack in her rulebook. Something invisible, almost shameful, bloomed in her chest when she found herself wondering later that night whether he had made it himself or bought it. She unwrapped it in the dark. Just cheese and tomato, still warm, no mayonnaise. He never stayed long. 30 minutes, sometimes less. Just stories. Always sitting at the edge of the bed, hands in his lap, knees together like a schoolboy. He laughed too easily and didn't have the shoulders of a man who knew violence. He listened when she spoke, not with fake nods or empty smiles, but with the quiet weight of someone who actually wanted to understand. That was rare, uncomfortable even. Busi didn't like the way it felt to be seen with no clothes being taken off. His eyes didn't move like other men's. They didn't dart to her chest or her thighs. They stayed on her face, especially when she wasn't talking. He seemed curious about the silence between her sentences. One day, he asked her what music she liked. She almost laughed. It had been so long since anyone asked her something that didn't have a price. "I don't listen to music," she said quickly, lighting a cigarette, hoping the smoke would end the question. But he nodded. "That makes sense," he said. Like, he understood something even she didn't, and then he left. That night, she dug through her drawer and found an old cassette player. She didn't remember why she'd kept it. Maybe for this moment. She clicked in a tape, closed her eyes, and let the crackling sound of Brenda Fassie fill the room. The song was Too Late for Mama. The lyrics stung like alcohol on a wound. The kind of song that made you remember everything you'd buried. She cried, but not the kind of crying you hear. The kind that just happens, slow and quiet, without warning. By the fifth visit, he still hadn't told her his name. That made her feel safer. Names were dangerous. Names carried weight. Names belonged in prayers, not transactions. But he told her other things. That he worked at a furniture warehouse. That his mother was still alive but they didn't speak. That he once wanted to be a pastor but stopped believing in salvation when his brother died in a shack fire. Busi didn't ask for details. She just listened. That was all he seemed to need. One afternoon, while he was talking about how his first job was cleaning buses at 4 a.m., she watched his hands. They were large, rough, with calluses near the thumbs. Not beautiful, not smooth, but real, honest. She didn't know what to do with that feeling, so she looked away and changed the subject. Asked him if he believed in God. He paused, thinking. Then said, "Sometimes, I think God believes in us more than we believe in ourselves." She almost laughed, but didn't. The silence between them grew heavy, like wet blankets on a sleeping child. That evening, after he left, she didn't go back to work. She just sat on the bed, legs crossed, staring at the wall. She thought about her rules. No love, no regulars, no dreams. This man was becoming a regular. This man was beginning to feel like a dream. She stood up, angry at herself, angry at him, angry at the fact that somehow she had let softness sneak in through the back door. She pulled her dress off, flung it to the ground, and stood naked in front of the mirror. Her body, covered in stretch marks and quiet scars, stared back. She lifted her chin. "You're not that woman," she whispered. "You don't get to want things." She put on her work face and her tallest heels and went back into the night. But something had shifted. Every laugh felt like a lie. Every touch, a transaction she couldn't separate from guilt. Her body moved, but her heart sat still, as if waiting for someone who wasn't coming. The next week, he didn't show up, or the week after that. 2 full weeks passed. Nothing. Busi told herself. She didn't care. She rolled her eyes when she thought about him. Maybe he found another woman. Maybe he got tired of her silence. Maybe he realized how stupid it was, trying to talk to someone like her. But then the 3rd week came. And when the knock came, on the door, her stomach dropped in a way she didn't recognize. She opened the door fast, pretending to look annoyed. There he was, in a collared shirt, holding a small plastic bag. She stepped aside without a word. He sat down, reached into the bag, and pulled out a ring. A cheap one. Not gold, not shiny, just a silver band that caught the light like a secret. He didn't kneel, didn't smile. He just looked at her and said quietly, "Will you marry me?" Busi stared at him, her mouth dry, her hands suddenly too still. Then, laughter, loud, sharp, echoing off the tin walls like thunder. She laughed so hard her ribs hurt. Then she spat on the floor just next to his shoes. "You're joking with a joke," she said. He didn't flinch. He just nodded, placed the ring on the table, and stood up. "You listen to me more than anyone ever has," he said softly. Then he left. No anger, no goodbye. Just a quiet door closing behind him like the last page of a book. Busi stood there, frozen. She didn't pick up the ring. She didn't cry. She just sat down, stared at her own feet, and lit a cigarette. But that night, she didn't go out to work. And when she looked at herself in the mirror, she didn't see fire. She saw a woman, with a locked door when in the faint sound of knocking that might never come again. The ring stayed on the table for days. Busi didn't touch it, didn't even glance in its direction if she could help it. But it was there, unmoving, silent, shining without permission. It mocked her every time she walked past it, like a question that refused to go away. At first, she told herself it meant nothing. Just a silly gesture from a lonely man. A fantasy from someone who didn't understand how women like her lived. He didn't know the rules. He didn't know what the world did to girls who opened their hearts too wide. But then again, he hadn't asked for her heart. He had offered his. That was what made it worse. In the mornings, she would get dressed the same way. Tight skirt, full face of makeup, a spritz of cheap perfume that smelled like mangoes. She'd step outside with her usual posture, chin high, eyes sharp. But something in her had slowed. The fire that usually burned in her steps now flickered. Some nights, she didn't even go to work. She just wandered, past the shebeens, past the taxi rank, past the rows of zinc shacks and washing lines full of old t-shirts. She would walk for hours, as if trying to outrun the feeling she couldn't name. People noticed. One woman, Dineo, another street worker from just 3 doors down, called out one night as Busi passed by in flat shoes and no lipstick. Busy. Are you sick or in love? Busy forced a laugh, but it came out wrong. Too brittle, too tired. That night, she came home and sat in the dark. No music, no fan. Just the quiet buzzing of township silence. Dogs barking in the distance, a baby crying somewhere. Laughter spilling out from a nearby spaza shop. She looked at the ring again. It hadn't moved, but something inside her had. She lit a candle, watched the flame dance. Then, for reasons she couldn't explain, she pulled a plastic basin from under her bed and filled it with warm water. She washed her feet slowly, almost reverently, as if preparing for something sacred. When she was done, she placed the ring in her palm. It was light. So light, she thought. Maybe it was hollow. She held it up to the candlelight and whispered, "What kind of man brings a ring to a woman like me?" But the ring didn't answer, and yet, it stayed. The next day, she walked to the warehouse. It wasn't. Hard to find. Cape Town's industrial district was loud, chaotic, full of men in overalls and forklifts rumbling over cracked pavement. She had never come here before. This place smelled of grease, dust, and tired dreams. She walked past the front office, asked for him by describing his face. She didn't know his name, only his hands, his voice, the way he sat like he was afraid of breaking the furniture. The receptionist looked confused but kind. She told Busy he hadn't come to work in 2 weeks. No call, no letter. Just stopped showing up. Busy's heart made a strange sound inside her chest. Not loud, just off. She walked back home in silence, ignoring the catcalls, ignoring the taxis that slowed down. That night she didn't eat. She didn't smoke. She just sat at the edge of her bed with her knees pulled up, staring at the ring like it held answers she was too scared to hear. She began remembering things. His laugh. The way he folded his hands when he was nervous. How he once got so excited talking about a book he read that he forgot to finish his sentence. She realized something terrifying. She missed him. She missed him in a way that didn't make sense. In a way that made her feel human again. And that was the most dangerous feeling of all. Busi had spent years building armor. She had stitched it from childhood trauma, sealed it with bad memories, and wore it proudly like a crown. She didn't fall in love. She didn't get left behind. But here she was, alone, and someone had left anyway. That weekend, she did something she hadn't done in years. She visited her mother. Her mother lived in a tiny flat across town, in an old government building with cracked tiles and paint peeling like scabs. The hallways smelled like old cooking oil and bleach. Busi hadn't seen her in almost 4 years. Not since the last fight, the one about shame and survival. Her mother had said, "You walk the streets like pain doesn't touch you." And Busi had screamed back, "You sat through pain like it was tea time." She didn't call before she came, just knocked on the door with her heart thudding in her throat. When the door opened, her mother stood there in a house dress, hair wrapped, eyes wide with something between shock and relief. Neither of them said a word. They sat in the kitchen later, sipping rooibos tea with too much sugar, the silence between them thick as fog. Finally, Busi spoke. "Ma, what does it mean when someone sees you and doesn't want to fix you? Just wants to sit?" Her mother looked up, surprised by the softness in Busi's voice. "It means they've already accepted what you've been fighting," she said simply. Busi nodded, eyes stinging. They didn't talk about work. They didn't talk about the past. But when Busi left, her mother squeezed her hand. Not hard, just enough to remind her she was still somebody's child. That night, Busi went home and placed the ring in a small cloth pouch. She didn't wear it, but she didn't hide it either. She began to change, not loudly, not all at once. She still worked, but less often. She started saying no to certain clients, started sleeping with the window open, letting the breeze touch her face. She started brushing her hair in the morning, Not for anyone, just because. It made her feel clean. And once a week she walked to the warehouse just to ask. But he never came back. His name remained a mystery. But his presence didn't. Because now, even in silence, she could still hear him. His absence became a sound in her life. A heartbeat she hadn't realized she'd been missing. And every night, she asked herself the same question. Did love knock once? And I locked the door? The warehouse never opened its doors again. A week passed. Then 2. Then 3. Every Sunday, Busi walked the same route, past the same crumbling walls, the same boys kicking bottle caps, the same dogs sleeping in dust. She didn't know why she kept coming. Maybe she expected a note, a sign, a trace of him, the man with the gentle hands and the eyes that asked questions without speaking. But each visit brought only silence. No one had seen him. No one even remembered him. The receptionist was gone. A new man sat at the desk now. Younger, impatient. He shrugged when she asked, barely looking up from his phone. That department closed. People moved, some retrenched, some disappeared. Disappeared? Yeah. You know, vanished. People do that. Busi didn't reply. She left, heart pounding harder than she wanted to admit. It was like he'd never existed at all. That night, she did something strange. She walked into the library. It was small, dusty, hardly used. A leftover relic in a community. More focused on food than fiction. She hadn't stepped into one since high school, where she used to hide behind shelves to avoid going home. She went to the front desk and asked, "Do you have records of old employees at K&M Furniture? Or maybe local obituaries?" The librarian, a woman with thick glasses and a kind face, narrowed her eyes. "Obituaries? I think he might be gone," Busi said softly. The woman didn't ask who, just nodded and pointed her toward the archive. Room. Busi spent hours flipping through yellowed papers, old community newsletters, back pages filled with forgotten names. It was quiet in the archive room, the kind of quiet that feels sacred, like someone else's past is listening. Then she found it. A small article, tucked into the corner of a page like an afterthought. Local warehouse worker. Found dead in informal home after illness. No photo. Just a name. Lindakula Mthembu. Age, 38. No children. No wife. Survived by a mother in the Eastern Cape. Busi stared at the name. Lindakula. She whispered it aloud. It felt like learning someone's secret after they were already gone. There was no mention of how he died. No mention of who found him. No details. Just silence between the lines. She walked home slowly, the name heavy in her chest like an unanswered prayer. When she got inside, she pulled the pouch from under her mattress and unwrapped the ring. This time, she slipped it onto her finger. It didn't fit perfectly. A bit loose. But it stayed. She wore it for hours without looking at it. She just sat in the corner of her room, back pressed against the cold wall, knees to her chest, and finally, she cried. Not the sharp, angry tears she was used to. These tears were soft, slow. She cried not just for him, but for the version of herself she never got to be with him, the girl who might have learned to speak gently, the woman who might have laughed without defense, the child who might have believed she could be loved without being used. She realized she didn't even know what he had wanted from her. Was it love? Was it hope? Was it just to be seen, just once, by someone who didn't charge him for the space? She remembered how still he used to sit, how nervous he was the first few times, how his words came fast at first, like he was afraid they'd be taken from him, and then how they slowed, settled. How he started asking her questions no one ever had. "Do you believe in beginnings?" he once asked her. "No," she'd answered. "Only endings." She had meant it, until now. She began to remember the tiny things, the way he touched the edge of the chair before sitting, how he used his left hand more than his right, the way he always checked the lock before leaving, like he wanted her to feel safe, the way he never asked her what she did outside that room, the way he respected the rules she never said aloud. But maybe the most haunting thing was this. He never told her he was sick, not once. No cough, no complaints, no medicine bottles, no mention of doctors or pain or endings. He gave her everything else, but kept that part locked away. And that, in some cruel way, made sense. He knew she didn't like weakness. He knew she didn't allow people to need her, so he gave her his presence, his time, his words. And then, quietly, like a man leaving a borrowed home, he disappeared before she could break her own rules. It wasn't romance. It wasn't even tragedy. It was something worse. It was unfinished. The next day, Busi went to church. Not to pray. Just to sit. It was empty, except for the cleaner sweeping dust near the front pews. She sat in the back. Let the silence hold her. She didn't light a candle. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just closed her eyes and whispered his name. Once. Twice. As if names meant something, even when the person was no longer here to hear them. And somehow, that felt like a beginning. Not the kind that promised happy endings, but the kind that let you open the door just enough to feel the wind again. That night, she returned home and wrote his name on a piece of paper, folded it, placed it in the ring pouch, and stored it in the drawer next to her bed. She didn't cry again. She just stood in front of the mirror, looked at herself full in the face, and said, aloud, for the first time in years, "You're allowed to want." The mirror didn't shatter. The world didn't end. But something inside her started to breathe, something that had been waiting. 2 months after she buried his name in a drawer, the township began to bloom again. Not with flowers. That wasn't how Cape Town's forgotten edges worked. But with noise, with color, with movement. Summer had come, and with it, the usual. Rhythm. Children screaming across dusty alleys, music pouring from tin speakers, the shebeen staying open until laughter turned into fights. And Busi. She was still there, still leaning on the wall outside the shebeen, still in her heels, though they'd grown shorter, still in makeup, though it was lighter now. But something had changed, not enough for strangers to notice, but enough for the mirror to tell the truth. She didn't look away anymore when she caught her reflection in shop windows. She didn't rush her eyeliner or hide her real laugh when it came. Most nights, she still worked. But now, she chose. Not just who, but why, and more than once, she found herself saying no. To the ones who grabbed, to the ones who barked instead of spoke, to the ones who reminded her of who she used to be. She began reading. Nothing heavy, just little books she borrowed from the same quiet library that had first whispered his name to her. She started keeping a notebook. Scribbled thoughts, names, questions, dreams, though she still struggled to call them that. One page had only one line. I wanted to know him after he left. That was the wound. Some days, she felt angry again, angry that he hadn't told. Hurt that he left her wondering, aching with a pouch of silver and no answers. But most days, she felt something softer. Gratitude. For what he gave. For what he saw in her. Even when she didn't. For being the first person who didn't look at her body before her soul. That was the hardest part to admit. Because Busi had always thought her soul was invisible. Until someone had proven it wasn't. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the zinc rooftops and the air turned gold, a new girl came to stand beside her, fresh-faced, nervous, probably no older than 20. She looked like Busi used to. Too alert, too quiet, too afraid to admit she was afraid. The girl didn't speak at first, just shifted from foot to foot, adjusting the tightness of her dress. After a while, she said, "Do they ever stop asking for more than you offer?" Busy took a drag of her cigarette, blew the smoke toward the sky. "No," she said simply. "But you learn to give less of yourself, not more." The girl nodded. Then she whispered, "Do you think we'll ever get out?" Busy didn't answer right away. She looked at the street, at the taxis honking, at the kids skipping rope with a phone charger wire, at the old man sitting on a crate, carving soap into shapes no one asked for. And then she said something she never would have believed months ago. "I think sometimes something gets in, even if we're closed, like wind, or light, or a person." The girl frowned, not understanding. "That sounds like a dream," she said. Busy looked straight ahead. "No, a reminder." The girl didn't ask for more, and Busy didn't explain. That night, back in her room, she did something new. She opened the pouch again, took out the ring, and slipped it onto a thin chain around her neck, not to mourn, not to wait, but to remember that someone, even just once, had spoken to her like she was not broken, that someone had knocked on the door she kept bolted shut. And when she didn't answer, still waited outside. That someone had dared to offer love, not as rescue, but as recognition. In the mirror, she still saw the same lines on her face, the same fire in her eyes. But now, she also saw softness. It was terrifying and beautiful. Weeks passed, and one morning, without meaning to, Busy found herself walking past a school. She stood behind the fence for a moment, watching the children run in uneven lines. Some laughed. One fell and cried. Another helped him up. It was ordinary, and that's what made it painful, because ordinary life had never belonged to her. But now, it whispered. Not as something she'd missed, but as something that might still be possible, in her own way. A little. Girl, maybe 6 or 7, ran to the fence and looked at her. "Why are you standing there?" she asked. Busy smiled, truly smiled. "Just remembering something," she said. The girl tilted her head. "Are you a teacher?" Busy laughed. "No." The girl thought for a second, then grinned. "You could be. You look like someone who knows. Stories." Busy blinked, then nodded slowly. "Maybe I do." As the girl ran off, Busy turned and walked home. That night, she opened her notebook again, wrote a new sentence. To be known, even briefly, is sometimes more powerful than being saved. She circled it twice. And finally, she let herself believe that maybe one day she'd write more. Not for anyone else, just to keep the parts of her that were real. The ring still hung from her neck. She didn't hide it anymore. And when people asked, rarely, but sometimes, she simply said, "It belonged to someone who saw me when I didn't see myself." That was all they needed to know, because some love stories aren't about marriage, they're about memory. And Busy, the woman who once trusted nothing but silence, had finally learned how to listen back.